This session, uh, I changed the title a little bit, Biomechanics and Stability. We'll talk about coordination and balance in relation to stability. Let's briefly review all the things we have been covering in the various sessions so far and how they relate to today's session. In the last two sessions, this is very important, we dealt with passive properties of the body. We used the tensegrity system as a toy model to explore how rigid and elastic elements work together. We explored similarities and differences between how our body organization works and how the tensegrity model works. With breathing, we introduce the idea of how muscular effort, mainly contraction of the diaphragm, can be converted into useful elastic energy, can be stored as elastic energy. The idea is when you store something as elastic energy, either external work, because you're dancing with the partners, their weight, or your own muscle contractions, uh, once you store them in a beneficial way, you can redirect them. Then you get this idea of choice. In the final session today, we are going to talk about one example of what impedes this flow of energy. Here are some words we use to describe movements we appreciate in the first session. The word that stands out is smooth, fluid. Now I have a question for you. What are the words you would associate with obstructions to smooth and fluid movement? Anything, this is just a word association thing. I'm not looking for a specific answer. Let's see what you're all saying. See, we don't have anything that stands out. Oh, we do. Jerky. Oh, this is a good one. We're going to talk about this a lot today. Arthritis, robotic. I like how you're thinking, but somehow surprisingly, all I wanted to talk about today was jerky. So far, we explored a word that connects jumping, yoga. You'll see some Tai Chi today. And this is flow. Intuitively, flow can be interrupted by restrictions or blockage. Think about a river, whatever mental model is helpful. When I mean flow in this course, I mean the flow of elastic energy across tissues in the body. What are some examples of restrictions in the body, and how can we observe the effect of restrictions? That's mainly what I want to deal with today. If you were to guess, what impedes the flow of elastic energy? Wow, let's see what you're all saying. Oh, you're all really with it. Stiffness, injuries, soreness, rigidity, muscular tension, holding muscles in tension longer than. I agree with all of these things. Uh, the important thing, which at least to me wasn't obvious until I started working with all of these ideas, is mental blockages. I won't have any time to talk about that today, but it is an interesting observation and worth noting. So I want to discuss these ideas in the context of stabilizing joints. Complex movements require us to stabilize across all joints, ideally. To understand stabilization, at least at a conceptual level, let's use the elbow joint. Now, there's over 350 joints in the human body, and we have to do this simultaneously. It's an amazing task that how it's organized mechanically, how it's organized neurally, and how it achieves everything. In the elbow, well, everywhere, muscles, tendons, and ligaments stabilize joints during movement. Let's recall that these elements have elastic properties similar to springs. Unlike springs, they can't push out when compressed. Like springs, they can exert a pull force when stretched. Muscles can reduce in length in response to neural input. This is activation from the nervous system, leading to muscular effort. But they can also exert forces passively across joints without any neural input when they're in a stretch state. You can stabilize joints by holding them in place. Like if muscles are going across a joint, if both muscles contract together, you can freeze the joint, right? So using neural input, you can hold a specific joint, or they can passively stabilize joints. Think of a hammock, or sleeping in a hammock, or think of a sling. This doesn't require neural input. To get an intuition for these two types of joint stabilization, let's do a simple exercise. Hold out your arm in front of you, and then contract your arm muscles really hard so that the idea is if somebody hits it, it still stays. This is good, but unfortunately what has happened is we have uh, compromised mobility for stability. But I'm greedy. How do you maintain stability without compromising mobility? That's one of the key questions. So in the first step where you just put out your hand, you mostly used passive stabilization. And when you deliberately engaged active stabilization, meaning you forced muscle activity to keep the arm there, if you did it hard enough, you perhaps experienced it as shaking. Now, when would you need to do this? When is it useful to hold a joint, for muscles to step in and help to hold a joint in place? Okay, let's see what you're saying. Gymnastics, standing, keeping balance. So here, my intuitions are in exact opposition to most of the answers. During walking and gymnastics, I would argue that we are not using active stabilization. Muscle activity is used to guide elastic energy and create movement as opposed to hold things in place. That's where the fluidity comes from, the lack of active stabilization, or at least that's the point I'm trying to make today. Lifting weights, sure. The closest to what I agree with is to encounter sudden push or pull. Basically, I think of active stabilization as emergency services. If you're about to get hit or fall down, you don't want the joints to twist out of their maximum range and strain your ligaments, and then they're very useful. But normally, as you'll see, when do we make use of active stabilization? We talked about when it's useful, but when do we make use of it? Okay, I won't dwell on this too much. Skateboarding, to avoid being knocked down, that is correct. To protect ourselves, yes. Landing from a jump, let's look at it. Let's revisit the double jump today. And later, we're going to look at that. When defending a punch, sure, anything that ends up getting you scared, we will end up engaging a lot of active stabilization. So most of us, unfortunately, unconsciously engage active stabilization or make use of emergency services in our body, even when it is not strictly necessary. So recall your yoga instructor saying, if you start to shake, you have gone too far and don't go so deep into the pose. This is what we are talking about. So the shaking during active stabilization in many cases is often too subtle to notice, but we can measure it using accelerometers. I'm going to show you some traces from a simple task. An accelerometer, if you have a smartphone these days, it will come equipped with an accelerometer. It's just detecting sudden changes in velocity. It's fairly sensitive. So all I said to I gave them my phone. I gave some people my phone, and I said, just reach out and give the phone to me. And when I looked at the acceleration trace, approximately when they started reaching, they had this wobble, much smaller than when you just hold and shake, was still there. The question is it possible to reach without having this characteristic wobble? The short answer is yes, but how do you get there is not straightforward. So I am erroneously engaging active stabilization in a few uh, movements, and I'm going to show you some examples. Give me a thumbs down if you don't hear the music from the video. So that's the experimental setup. I'll play the rest of the video, but what I want you to pay attention is if you looked at the blinking things on my arms, they are accelerometers. They are wirelessly transmitting acceleration information to my computer, and there are many traces. So I put 2 on my arms and 2 on my legs. And I, for the most part, I will focus on my left arm, which is the top trace. I know my left arm has issues because of some accidents and injuries in my life. And you'll see that the activation is very subtle. So for the rest of this video, pay attention to this part of the screen. The top trace is where you'll be mostly paying attention. So if you saw that, I quickly realized that I engaged in active stabilization briefly. And I turned my head to look at the screen, make sure I did it. So this is the hand we're talking about, the left hand. Oops. OK, so we're talking about the active stabilization happening when my arm is in that position. And here's the trace offline. I'm going to get a higher resolution version of it. And after that movement, it's fairly quiet. If you look at the y-axis, it's really small, an order of magnitude smaller compared to what I showed you when people were reaching out in front. And when you shake, it's probably like, I don't know, 50 times more. Here's another example. I just happened to record this. As I was setting up, I was documenting the position of the sensors. So, sorry, the other 2 sensors are on my lower back, I think, in this case. So as I lift my shirt, my arm goes into the same position, and then I end up having to engage emergency services once more. This doesn't happen in my right arm, only in my left arm. So we saw that we have identified a specific configuration where my left arm is likely to ask for emergency services, even if it's not needed, strictly speaking. So this is the configuration. So I know that I tend to pop my shoulder out because of a neck injury. It's largely better, but still, you can't catch these things in the video just visually. Here's another example of active stabilization in my forearm this time, still probably related to my shoulder. as I transition
And to
in a yoga
tabletop.
pose.
Tuck toes. Take a deep breath in.
So this is mainly what I'm talking about. So that's where it was. That's where I see recruitment of emergency services. And you see my shoulders popped out a little bit. It's very small, but nonetheless, it's there. And then I also tend to make use of these services while holding a pose. Let's have a look.
Exhale.
It's even smaller,
Deep breath
but try
in.
to pay attention to the top trace.
Deep breath out. Inhale, right leg up and back. Three-legged dog. Keep the toes pointed.
Okay, so there's a lot going on here. What I want to show you, the really obvious holding my lower back as I do something, as I move my leg. That's really obvious, and that could use improvement. But there was a more subtle change in how much I recruit emergency services as I hold the pose. And when I took a closer look at the video, it always had to do with when my belly was going in during the end of an exhale and the beginning of an inhale. It's probably related to I let go of the tone in my diaphragm whenever I do this. It's probably related to that. But now you see many examples of when we unconsciously engage active stabilization. It could be in many for a specific joint configuration. It could be when we think we are doing nothing and just holding still, or it could be when we are moving. Another example is what happens if we put stress in, in this case, it's a
Lower
push-up.
to your belly.
You see how bad it is compared to my right arm?
Lower to your belly.
Next. So if you compare the two traces from the left and the right forearms, you, I still am making use of it in my right arm, but much less. So active stabilization is useful to prevent tissue tears during emergencies. We tend to overuse it due to restrictions that can be caused by injuries or due to some habit that we developed. Yoga, Tai Chi, breathing exercises can be used to become aware of active stabilization and slowly overcome it through diligent practice. The mental model, how I think about it, is how does this prevent flow of elastic energy? Suppose this is a muscle system, and then I'm using active stabilization somewhere here, meaning I have the muscles contracted and I'm holding it in the middle. So the length changes here are then not related to the length changes here. Information transmission is blocked in that manner. And what we saw is an outcome of what would happen, this shaking response, whenever we tend to go into the situation. Now, have a question. Could you somehow use the information from accelerometers in physical therapy during the recovery of your muscles and joints? I think so. If you'd like to test it out in the lab, let me know if you're a physical therapist. We are happy to create a study with you. Okay, so let me explain what's going on. There's a lot going on the screen. On the top, you see the activity of my tricep muscle. So if I flex it, it's really active. Or if I do a push-up, it's going to be active. And you see when I flex it and I start wobbling, you see the wobble in the bottom trace. So that's from this wireless accelerometer, right? So I'm overusing my muscle. But something like this is going to happen even if I just, reach to different extents, right? So if I have really bad posture, and I try to reach, there's a big wobble. Well, there's a bigger wobble, and there's a lot of muscle activity. But if I try to reach, I don't have to use my muscle. Of course, I'm using other muscles, but the point is I don't have to co-contract my bicep and my tricep. Once more, this is how I would prefer not to move. Let's say slouching. So you see the wobble down there, and then you see the muscle being really engaged. And on top, and now I'll try to do it more efficiently without having to, sticking to the idea of the whole. This required a lot of training, at least for me. Don't use my muscle, I don't see the wobble as much. So remember, we primarily think about the tricep as an elbow extensor, right? So tricep fires, elbow extends. Bicep fires, elbow contracts. That's true to a certain, that is correct, but you can also think of this whole muscle system in the back as a hammock or a sling, and then you can think about your bones as resting in the hammock, and you can just pull them forward with your bicep, so to speak. Okay. I have another demonstration. For this, I won't need the accelerometer, but it's fine, I'll keep it. I'm going to show you uh, when we use emergency services from the forearm. So I'm going to switch the electrode position. This might hit home for a lot of people because we all use computers. So first, to show you, I'm recording from this muscle. There's a bit of a delay, but when I flex it, I see activity in that muscle, right? I'm trying to show off, or whatever poses people do. Now, I'm going to try to get into a position where I want to use my keyboard. And muscles are happy, not too chaotic. And let's say I get too comfortable in my seat and start slouching. Unfortunately, this is my forearm. Even though I'm slouching here, I'm stressing out my forearm. The solution that they provide in the industry is, one example is a vertical mouse, right? So watch, I'm going to turn my right arm. And the muscle activity goes down. It's okay. It's a temporary solution, but nothing changed up here. Another thing we see, so let's say we go back to that. I'm going to type on my keyboard, and my muscles are unnecessarily engaged. And let's say, hold your spine straight. Just makes it worse. Right? So we shouldn't be thinking about using active stabilization to hold things in place. So there's a big difference between that and that. The core concept has to do with the type of stabilization we use. And as you see over down here, we missed it. I'll do that again. So you see the wobble in the down trace, right, as I hold. And then when I turn them off, it goes down a little bit. Still there, but smaller. So that was the demonstration. Okay. So here's an example of multitasking that I hate most. Being on a treadmill and watching something in the gym. It's almost as if my legs are for running, my head is for watching, my brain will do something else, my heart will do something else. My personal opinions aside, uh, when multitasking, we do this often, right? The task is something we arbitrarily define. We can define breathing and walking as two different tasks, and then we are multitasking all the time. The two tasks can either interfere with each other, which commonly happens during active stabilization, excuse me, yeah, or they cannot interfere with each other. And this is the goal of active stabilization, presumably. Multitasking, ideally, you want two things to happen simultaneously without interference. Well, that's tough. You're one organism. And or they can reinforce each other in a positive way. So this is the ideal scenario. And synchrony between systems, we saw an example of this last time. Let's revisit things we have already seen in this course. Here's an example of an interfering interaction between jumping and turning rope. Remember what the double jump was? Unconsciously, beginners tend to jump twice per rope turn. Since we have already seen this, but it's possible to jump just once per rope turn. So the difference between the two, if we recall, was in blue, I'm showing you the position of my big toe in the up and down direction. In red, I'm showing you the length of the arm muscles. My arm muscles are oscillating at the same uh, frequency, so to speak, as my jumps in the case of a single jump. And in the case of a double jump, for every cycle of uh, arm length changes, there's two little jumps. So I didn't explain that very properly, but let me talk about active stabilization and how it relates to that. In the moment where we touch down, which is this point, I'm starting to collect the kinetic energy from the jump into elastic energy. My arms are but one tissue system uh, where I can store this energy. But if I think about this task as, oh, my arms are for turning the rope and my legs and torso are for jumping, I can block the flow of elastic energy between the arms and the legs and the torso by just holding. And that is an example of what happens right as we land. We don't, we don't want the landing to interfere with the rope turn because the hands are busy turning the rope. And then we use the other jump to actually take off, to reestablish our connection. Here's another example that we saw, an example of non-interfering and interfering interactions between the belly and back muscles. In green, I'm showing you the trace of the length of my back muscles as I do a breathing exercise. In this case, I'm doing an active exhale, meaning I'm using abdominal muscles to push the belly in, and I'm doing a passive inhale. I'm letting it relax back. Now you can see there is a clear oscillation in my back muscles in the beginning. And then somewhere around here, I lose the oscillation even though my stomach is moving. At some level, subtly, I have engaged contraction stabilization in my back because I'm holding the back so that the back doesn't interfere with my task of moving the belly forward and back. So that's another example of coordination. So let's review this mental model we have been working with. I'm just unplugging myself. So we use this as a toy model for understanding efficient movement and how forces get transmitted through the system. It's not exact. Our body is obviously not arranged like this because in this case, the rigid elements are not touching each other. Our bones clearly touch each other at joints. We asked the question in the first session, how do we go faster? And the idea was we were tuning the tension in the entire system. An analogy in this case would be holding the entire system in this place versus this place. This is a more relaxed place. This is a more tensed place. Just like when you increase the tension in a guitar string, it produces higher note. The physics are not the same, but it's a useful mental model. You can increase the tone in your muscles. Tone equals tension. You can do it actively or passively. Preferably if you do it passively by changing the length and not dumping in muscle activation, it's easier to enable coordination in the body. What is an effective use of elastic elements? It's to store muscle activity as elastic energy. We saw this in the breathing session, where we saw how the contraction of the diaphragm can be used to store elastic energy throughout the chest muscles. And we also showed that it is possible to expand in all dimensions, including the lower back. And just like we discussed just now, it's for cooperative multitasking. How do we improve the flow of elastic energy? By becoming aware of and reducing restrictions in our body so that elastic energy can be communicated. Information transfer can happen freely between different parts of the body. If you need a mental model, think about the double jump. So whenever you land, are you holding in because you're turning the rope? And then you need to brace yourself, so to speak. So I have a question. I have been taking bar classes in which the instructors praise the muscle shake as an indication that the muscle is working hard to get stronger. Do I think this is incorrect and could lead to injury? The answer, unfortunately, is more complicated. It depends on how you got to the shaking part. If your goal is to simply if your goal is to simply get a shake, yeah, I don't know, you can just contract your muscle and you'll start shaking. But that clearly is not the idea in a bar class. In a bar class, you are playing with the mobility of your joints, right? So you're lifting your leg up and then trying to hold it there and make little pulses. At some point, it'll start shaking, and then you stop. I assume that's what's happening in your class. So you have explored the limit of how many times you can stay in equilibrium in that position. And then at some point, the muscle will get tired, and it'll start shaking. So I hope that's useful. If I didn't answer your question, feel free to let me know. But all of this, feel the shake in the core. I hate those instructions personally, but that's just my personal opinion. So one of the goals of this course is to arm you with the knowledge and the concepts that you need so that you can make decisions later. Here's an example of a popular workout that somebody asked me about. What is my opinion on it? So Tom Brady, I don't follow most sports. So his selling point is that he is 43 and he's going into his 10th Super Bowl. And being that functional and that at top of the game is rare. And either this workout is motivated by him, I don't know the exact relationship, but here the good part of this workout is they use elastic elements, which is fine. I'm not saying that's the only way to work out. It increases the probability of doing something right. But here's what I want you to be able to interpret based on all the things I've told you. They have a very strong position that you can't train slow to move fast. For optimal performance, they say, take your task and specialize for it. I want to know what your opinion is. Here, we have gone through both fast and slow things in this course. We have gone through cardio exercise, and we have gone through yoga and Tai Chi, which are slow. And this is what I've showed you, the relationship between fast and slow movements, and I've advertised the advantages of slow movements. So are slow, deliberate movements, in your opinion, useful to improve fast movements? I haven't explicitly commented on that. See what you're all saying? Okay. Now, how? Precision, control, I agree with all of these. Yes, it is often more difficult to move slowly. If you try trying to walk very, very slow, it's next to impossible to try to replicate what happens normally. Okay, allow all of these answers. More awareness of motion. Yes, that's closer to how I think about it. Okay, so I'll share with you my opinion. So slow, deliberate movements can be used to identify and remove restrictions in your body to better facilitate fast movements. So the idea is you work slowly, become aware of the restrictions like the one I showed with my left arm when I'm in this position, and slowly become aware of the restriction and get rid of it. And then the quality of, let's say I run on a treadmill, it changes for the next time. The experience, the feel of it changes a little bit. So it's, in my opinion, it's important to do both things. If you just remove restrictions but don't train at the speed, it's also not useful because the skills, you need at least some amount of input to transfer. Now, many people ask this question, which workout should I do? Is it the Tom Brady workout? There's PX90 or whatever. There's many, right? So no matter which workout you do, there will be an optimal and a suboptimal way of doing things. I hope that is clear from all the things you have seen in this course. I have tried to show you, tried to show the same motion and see how it can be very different from a feeling perspective, even though if it looks the same. And I hopefully, I didn't show that many examples, but of seemingly different movements which highlight the same principle. But in general, less engagement of emergency services is better. So before we end, I do want to talk about opportunities for you to continue talking to us and engaging. We would love if you're a physical therapist or you want to create some things. So our immersion lab services are available for a fee. But there are many free workshops, open houses, research projects, art installations, all of these things. If you would like to be, I don't like spamming people, so after this course, you won't be getting 2 emails from me every week. If you would like to be informed about these opportunities and events in the future, please write your email. If not, no hard feelings. So if there is, my hope for you from this course is that this course has equipped you with some actionable information that can assist you in making educated decisions for your wellness, for your workout, or just help you think about movement from a broader perspective. Thank you so much for sticking with me till the end.
In your ergonomics typing keyboard example, is it basically just the idea of like letting go and relaxing that kind of removed that
So
tension?
there's that's an excellent question, actually. There is a subtle difference. Sometimes letting go results in something like a slouch. So you have let go in some places and then it ends up tensing other things. So you just shifted the stress around. The idea is that when we talked about muscle systems, I didn't go too deep into this, but the idea is that there is a specific muscle system which includes your inner core and the integrity. What do I mean by integrity? Make sure none of the bands end up uh, in this configuration. No muscles end up in this configuration. This is also another case for engaging active stabilization. I can't show very well in this model, but in our body, this is not going to be tolerated because there is no more information. When something moves, you don't the nervous system doesn't get any information. So there are tricks that the nervous system uses, right? If you study neuroscience, it's called alpha gamma co-contraction, whereby the muscle ends up getting activated and getting taut. So that's basically emergency services. Uh, so yes, the idea is to stay relaxed, but also toned. Toned meaning having tension and length.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you for such an informative and engaging course.
You're welcome. I had a lot of fun making it. So thank you everyone for coming. It meant a lot.